All right, so last week we took it back to basics quite a little bit and talked about sharing is caring. That's a pretty far way back to basics. Would you say? As we talked about, I mean, that's something you probably see in like every kindergarten classroom across the country, plastered on the wall. Sharing is caring. So we're gonna continue to go down the path of taking it back to basics. As I can't remember which song it was that we were listening to last week. I'm pretty sure it's a Cody Carnes song, but going back to where we started kind of thing. This morning we're going to title this sermon, Can You Still Rejoice? Can you still rejoice? And when you think about going back to where it all started, when you think about when your relationship was established with Jesus Christ and you received salvation and you became a child to the Father, was it easier then, looking back on it, and this I'm asking a question, so don't be afraid to answer. Was it easier to rejoice back then, right then, when your salvation was new and fresh? When I say don't be scared to answer, I'm like, you can verbalize with your mouth big boy words. Did we have more joy right then? I mean, when you went from being a lost person to experiencing the fullness of Jesus Christ all at once. I mean, bam, you're filled with joy. You're overflowing with it. That first little bit, when you say it and you mean it and it's in your heart, it's way easier to be filled with joy, to rejoice in what the Lord is doing. And I wanted to make sure, I'm one of those guys that really likes to fine-tune things and break down things to the lowest common denominator to make sure that I understand it. What is the definition of rejoice? The Webster's definition out of the book says to feel or show great joy or delight. Would we say that in our current world, in the things that are taking place, that it's getting possibly a little tougher to rejoice? With all the things going on, is it harder to feel or show great joy or delight? You could say at times it gets a little bit harder. We're going to fix that this morning. We're going to look at Philippians 4:4-8. Philippians chapter 4, verses 4-8. Says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to all men. The Lord is at hand. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds through Jesus Christ. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. When searching the Scripture, that is one of the passages that I found to give us the blueprint on being able to rejoice. What's Bible stand for? Basic instructions before leaving earth. Here's your blueprint on rejoicing. right here. We'll break it down further so that we understand this step by step. What is the first step when we look at this as a blueprint for being a people who rejoice? Number one, rejoice. Rejoice always. Number two, be gentle, not rough. These days, and I talked about it last week, my kind of Oscar the Grouch mentality and attitude that I usually carry. That doesn't work if you're a person that wants to be filled with joy. If you are a person who can constantly rejoice in the Lord, that don't work when you're this person that does nothing but cause friction everywhere that you go. It doesn't work. We've got to be willing to put on our gentle side and not be so rough, not be so coarse, not rub everybody the wrong way. So number two was be gentle, not rough. Number three, and I find that this is one of the ones that is, what's crazy? You think about spiritual maturity, you think the more spiritually mature you are, the less of these things affect you. Not this one. This one affects the people that are the more spiritually mature group that you have. This affects your prayer warriors harder than it does anybody else. Number three, don't be anxious. If you are a prayer warrior, if you are a person who is constantly looking for things and people to pray for, eventually these things that you look for to pray for and these people that you look at to pray for, you start to take and carry an emotional toll for these people, and you start to be anxious about the things that are taking place. You carry that weight. If you are a person who does that, it gets harder and harder to rejoice. So don't be anxious. The way that you do that, this is a process. It's building on each other. Number four, pray. This is a threefold answer. Pray, give thanks to God, and give it to God. That's how you get rid of that anxiousness. Once I have prayed about it, once I have given God my thanksgiving in it, I'm giving it to God. I'm setting it at His feet, and I can't do any more with it. He can, I cannot. Why would I carry it? That's how you get rid of that anxiousness, is to truly give it to God. Pray about it, offer your thanksgiving, give it to God. Number five, and this may be the hardest in our current climate and the things that we currently deal with. If it is good, and if it is of God, think about it and keep it on your mind. Keep it right here in the forefront. We are all creatures who, I don't care if you have ninja focus. I don't care if you're that kindergartner that is on Ritalin that takes 3 Mountain Dews before they go to school, who's bouncing off every wall that exists. It doesn't matter. It is hard to keep the good things, to keep the things of God in your mind all the time. It's hard. This world does nothing but offer distractions from keeping God where He should be, in our heads and in our hearts. But if, it's the biggest 2-letter word in the world, if we can do these things, then we'll start to experience what it says in verse 7. We will experience the peace of God that surpasses all understanding, and He will guard our hearts and our minds. When we talk about keeping the good things of God in our minds, and this world offering every distraction under the sun, the way that we combat all these distractions flooding our minds is to guard it. That's too easy, right? Makes complete sense. And if we have peace that surpasses all understanding, it makes it easier not to get anxious about things. It makes it easier to offer your praise and thanksgiving, give it to God, and know in the victory. You already have the victory. You have the triumph. What do I have to be anxious about? Do we think if we can do these things that it would make it easier to be a person filled with the joy of the Lord? Do we think if we can do these things that it would be easier to rejoice? Being able to rejoice can only happen if a person is filled with joy, right? You can't rejoice from a place of no joy. It doesn't make any sense. You can't make it to church in your truck if you don't have gas. You can't rejoice if you don't have joy. And I'm assuming that we collectively, individually, we are a people that want to be filled with the joy of the Lord. To make it easy, raise your hand if you say no. If I'm offering you a lifetime supply of the joy of the Lord, raise your hand if you are not going to take it. Okay, no hands. We'll move forward. We want to be filled with the joy of the Lord. Do we want to be people who can rejoice because we are filled with the joy of the Lord? Hand in hand. Hand in hand. What are some things that steal our joy? What are some things that steal our ability to rejoice? And really, I'm asking the same thing, but what are some of the things that steal your joy or your ability to rejoice? Worry, hurt. I wasn't sure if it was fear or beer because they'll both do it. They'll both do it. People. There's a big one. People. All you people. Yeah, you got to live with some of them. Do what? World events. Keep going. We're on a roll. Don't stop. What are some things? Government. Agreed. Paperwork. There's a few weird people that enjoy that stuff. Money. I'll take money a step further. Money or lack thereof can steal your joy, can steal your ability to rejoice. All of these things, it's kind of like charging someone with disorderly conduct. It's just a funnel. Like, man, they did this and this and this, and it doesn't fit that statute. What can I charge? Disorderly conduct. Everything that we could possibly imagine as stealing your joy or stealing your ability to rejoice, we can funnel into this one statement right here. If we are not concerned with the things that God is concerned about, our joy will be stolen. Our ability to rejoice will be taken from us. If our hearts, if our minds are anywhere that His is not, it is going to be impossible for us to find joy. You may find some earthly happiness. It does not last. It is not real. It will fade. Joy is real. And we only experience that and experience the ability to rejoice when it's that way, when it is of God, when it is His, when it is the things after Him. Then we can experience the joy. God is concerned with taking every person that has ever walked the face of this earth, God is concerned with taking them from death to life. He is concerned with that. His heart rejoices over each and every person who experiences salvation. God rejoices over each and every person who has turned their back and walked away from God and has returned. Would we agree that God rejoices over every salvation and every return of a prodigal son or daughter? He rejoices over that. When people return to God, He rejoices. If we have the joy of the Lord, and if our heart is a heart after God's, then that will cause us to rejoice as well, right? When we get the opportunity to see somebody experience salvation for the first time, does that bring us joy? When we see that person that we have been praying for year after year after year, who once knew the Lord and walked devoutly with Him, and they've stepped away, when they walk through this door Sunday morning, are we on fire right then? We're filled with joy, and we have the opportunity to rejoice, not by ourselves, but with the Lord, because there He is rejoicing as well. In Jesus' parable about the prodigal son, what do we think about in that story? We constantly think about the prodigal, right? We think about the son who left, who comes back. It is, yes, wasting money, acting foolish. This story is just as much about the older brother as it is the son who turned away from his father. So we're going to look at it. Bear with me because it's a little bit of reading, like 21 verses. Y'all know how I am with reading. Bear with me. Luke 15, 11 through 32. Luke 15, 11 through 32. Then Jesus said, "A certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me.' So he divided to them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into the fields to feed swine. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave to him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, while I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. He said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to be merry." Here's where we're really going to hone in a little bit. "Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. So he answered and said to his father, lo, these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time, and yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again, was lost and is found. So let's look at this really, really honest. Let's look at this with the perspective of the older brother. Put yourself in those shoes as we go through this, and be honest with yourself. Year after year after year, the older son worked his tail off, day in and day out. What was his brother doing while he was working his tail off? He was partying. He was burning through his dad's money. While the older brother, again, stayed home, worked day in, day out. He didn't just work, he also watched his father in his brokenness grow with each passing day. He is the one who saw how broken his father became. Not his brother. His brother wasn't there. His brother didn't know, and he did not care. He was too busy drinking, going to the bar, going to the club, hanging out with not so classy ladies. That's what his brother was doing. His brother was living it up. So not only did he, as we spoke about with joy earlier, you have to have joy in order to rejoice. He didn't care about what his dad was going through because he didn't even know what his dad was going through, because he was only concerned with himself. He had no idea how much he was hurting his father. But not the older brother. Each and every day he worked and watched his dad's heart break with each and every day that passed. And when his brother returned, he did not rejoice. He questioned it. He took, not only did he not rejoice that his brother was home, but he was so ate up that he could not even rejoice or find any pleasure in the fact that his dad, who he watched break down every day, he couldn't even take joy in the fact that his dad was happy, that his dad had the blessing of his son returning. He found no joy, no pleasure in any of it. All he could think about was himself. Now, when I said look at this from the older brother's perspective and put yourself in those shoes, do we think we can understand that a little bit? Do we think we would also be more concerned with ourselves? He was wrapped up in the injustice that had been done to him. He was wrapped up in the resentment that he had for his brother. He felt like we do from time to time, right? Literally, that's what's wrote in my notes. I'm supposed to sit down and cross my legs and pout and throw on a mean face and say, that's not fair. That's how we feel. That's how us humans do. We get all sore about it, and just hear half them kids up there right now. I guarantee I've heard them all do it. It's not fair. That's what this older brother was busy doing. That's not fair. He was missing out on multiple blessings, right? His brother, who was dead, is now alive. His father, who was more broken each and every day, has now been made whole. He was missing the entire celebration and every reason there was to be celebrating. Here's a scary fact. Scary, scary fact. And this is learned by looking through the eyes of the older brother in this story. It is possible to serve God day in, day out, year after year, and your heart be far from Him. Is that kind of crazy to think about? Think about it for a second. You can do the work of God each and every day, and years later look back, and your heart has not been after His. You are not close to Him. You have not experienced His presence or His joy, but you're in His activity and work day in and day out. How can we do this? How can it happen? You might be the hardest worker. You might be the most dependable. You might walk through the doors of the church every single time that they're unlocked and be filled with bitterness in your heart. You can be filled with the bitterness knowing that I do this, I do that, I do the work of the Lord. The list goes on and on and on, right? No one ever helps me. No one even notices all the blood, sweat, and tears I put into this place. Again, that's not fair. And you're filled with bitterness. Now, when you're in that place, do you have the ability to rejoice? When you are in that place, are you filled with the joy of the Lord? Absolutely not. Sometimes we become so preoccupied with the work of God, the work that God has called us to do, that we miss out on the miracles of God that He is working in someone else's life right next to us. We get so tied up in what God is doing with us and through us that we completely miss what He's doing through Will's life, Ruby's life. If I'm so caught up with preparing a message for Sunday morning, preparing an interactive lesson for Sunday night, getting ready for a devotional on Wednesday night, and praying and doing home visits and changing the sign and making sure Brother Terry mows, coaching Pee Wee on Tuesday. If I get so preoccupied with the things that God has blessed me to do and I start carrying it as a burden, I'm going to become bitter. No one's going to want to be around me. I'll be filled with no joy and have no ability to rejoice. And when I stand in front of you on Sunday morning worshiping, that's fake. I'm not worshiping. I'm going through the motions. And when we talk about taking it back to basics, that's a basic principle. My worship is real when I have joy, when I have peace that surpasses all understanding. And when I look at it as a burden, I'm the pastor. I got to make sure I'm worshiping right. Otherwise, these other people won't worship right. There's nothing to it. It's fake. It's garbage. Do not get so preoccupied with what God has called you to do that you can't experience the joy and the blessing of seeing God's work in other people's lives as well. If we miss what God is doing in someone else's life, surely we can't rejoice in it. If we serve the Lord out of duty or habit, and we're not coming out of a place of joy and gratitude, then we will find no reason to rejoice. Anyone who does any part of any service, function, or activity of the body of Christ, if it is done out of habit, out of duty, you will find no joy. You will be empty, and it will be a dead work. We'll feel like the older brother in this story. We'll be filled with resentment. We will only see the injustice. We won't be able to see the other side of it, the blessing, the joy that should come in seeing our brother who was dead come back to life. We miss that. If we serve God out of obligation, we will envy every person we come in contact with who has joy, because all we carry around is the weight of this cross, this burden I carry each and every day. It's awful. Poor, poor me. You cannot experience joy when you look at things like that, when you carry the weight of the word says, pick up your cross and follow me. It doesn't say get sad about it. Goodness, there is joy. When you think about that cross, do you think about the horrible, horrible death of Jesus Christ in what he went through? Do you think of only the negative of that day, or do you think about the joy and knowing that he did it for you, he loved you that much, and because of it, you get to spend your eternity with God? That's how we look at that, right? That's how we should look at it. We should at least see the positive if we're going to see the blood, the tears, the bad. There's good. Obviously, there's good. But that person who experiences no joy and has no ability to rejoice, they don't see that. They look at the burden. They look at the obligation. They look at the duty. Did Jesus come here with a duty? Was he on a mission that ended right there? Yes, but he saw and felt the joy of serving his Father. He rejoiced in it. He didn't carry it, it didn't weigh him down. That is not the life that God intends any Christian to live. He does not intend you to live a life where you feel weighed down by the blessings he gives you. And any work you do in the kingdom of God is a blessing. It's not a burden. Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the thoughts that I think towards you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope." When the older brother saw his prodigal brother return, what did he see? I mean, we're sitting here talking about Jeremiah 29:11, a future and a hope. The older brother saw his future fading. He saw everything that he was working for slipping away. His hope that, man, my brother wasted all his stuff. I'm gonna be getting this and this and this and this. He saw that dwindling. He saw it all fading away. He saw that it was lost. Do not live like that. You're given a future and a hope. Don't be the older brother at the party saying, boo-hoo, poor, pitiful me. Come to the celebration. Spend time with the Father. Share his joy. When you think about this story, those are all things that the older brother was willing to miss out on. The joy of his dead brother returning. The joy of seeing his father happy and experiencing joy, overjoyed. The whole celebration, he missed it. How many of us miss the celebration in here? How many of us miss the celebration? How many of us miss out on seeing someone else overjoyed, blessed? How many of us miss it when a miracle's worked in someone else's life? Because we're like that older brother. Rejoice in what the Father is doing always. Always. We gave you the blueprint on how to do it. But I'm going to urge you this morning, rejoice in what God is doing always, because He is always doing something. God does not sit in heaven idle. He's got too much going on to sit idle. If He's always doing something and only good flows from the Father, do we always have something to rejoice about? We absolutely do. But we've got to get our older brother prodigal story, whiny, poor, pitiful me, boo-hoo attitudes out of the way. We've got to be able to be filled with the joy of the Lord in order to rejoice. And we will never, ever do that coming from a place of obligation, duty, or habit. That's why I asked the question this morning, is everybody in here blessed? And every single hand was raised. If we're blessed, we have a reason to rejoice. So do that this morning.